They told me once at a town meeting over stale coffee and folding chairs that you can't fence a feeling that nature belongs to everyone, and I believed them until a woman in pearls tried to steal my lake. And then I learned that nostalgia can be printed, notarized, and served with a summons, and if you listen hard enough, the truth smells like wet dirt and old paper. It started with a phone call. On a regular afternoon, I was halfway through replacing a broken trail sign near the Western Ridge mud on my boots whined in my collar when the satellite in my vest pocket buzzed, and a renter named Lacey said, "They're all over the shore, music fires. You should come see." I drove like a man who knows what he owns. Tires chewing the dirt. Road shocks grunting with each rut. The truck's radio dead, so the bass hit the trees instead, and when I crested the rise, I heard the music before I saw the tents, that bass-heavy wedding reception kind of sound that feels wrong in a forest. 40 people were strewn along the bank, multicolored tents like a messy bouquet, grills hissing under smoke coolers, cracked open children running barefoot through moss I'd tended for years. And in the center of it all, reclining in a zero-gravity chair with a stemless glass, as if she were reviewing a fundraiser, was Karen Stiller, Pearl's pastel jacket, the sort of smile that expects obedience. She put out a manicured hand and said, "Lovely spot, Randall," as if names and deeds were courtesy, and when I told her she was trespassing, she laughed and quoted a vague public access line that turned out to be as thin as tissue. I rattled off dates and deeds and the 1931 dam permit my grandfather kept like a Bible, and she waved a hand and said, "You can't gatekeep nature," which felt like an insult that bit into my bones. I gave them 5 minutes to clear out, because I'm not a man who enjoys confrontation. I filmed the open containers and kids with sparklers, and when the deputies arrived and checked county records, it was plain this shoreline sits on land, recorded in my family's name. For generations, citations were issued, the RVs pulled away, and Karen glared like a monarch scorned, leaning from her SUV to tell me, "You just made a very big mistake." 2 weeks of quiet followed, and I felt dangerously like we'd closed it. I smoothed boot prints, healed the fire-scarred soil, refunded a few rattled renters, and started thinking about fence posts. Then an envelope thick paper with a gold-embossed seal slid under my gate. Whispering Pines Homeowners Association versus Randall Bishop filed in district court claiming obstruction of community access, psychological harm to families, suppression of community heritage, and demanding $100,000 plus permanent shared shoreline rights. I sat in my truck, gripping the wheel, because this was no longer a camping dispute, but an attempt to rewrite reality. I called Hank Caswell. Hank, who smells of old books and strong coffee. A fourth-generation mountain lawyer who once dismantled a sketchy telecom deal in a courtroom and left a clause named after him. He read the filing, muttered, and pointed at the last page, a high-resolution map with a neat easement overlay. Reference numbers, a seal that, if believed, would fold my shoreline into public access. The burden of proof was theirs, Hank said, which was good because I had trunks full of deeds, photographs of my grandfather breaking ground, county water board letters, and the old dam permit with wax stamps to prove we built and maintained this lake. But it wasn't just legal papers they'd started shaping the narrative. Glossy newsletters slipped into mailboxes with anonymous quotes about generational access, a timeline of communal events that had never taken place, and a brand new website advertising an annual Diamondback Lake Campout testimonials, fake permit logos, a downloadable traditions PDF claiming get-togethers since 2017. Someone had manufactured a past and put it on the internet, weaponized nostalgia designed to sway a judge or a jury, and that was the twist. This wasn't only a land fight, it was an informational war aimed at making the shoreline feel public before the law ever said so. Trevor, a friend who used to work in InfoSec, dug into the website and found careless fingerprints the domain registered privately 2 weeks before hosted on a drag-and-drop builder, and buried in a forgotten directory was an email tied to Karen. They hadn't scrubbed their tracks. We printed screenshots and server logs. Hank threaded them into a counterclaim for fraud and mischaracterization. And I began to smell strategy PR spin staged optics, a slow squeeze meant to outlast a single landowner. Then the harassment started, small petty and then uglier anonymous late-night calls with nothing but breathing a bag of marshmallows at my mailbox with a note that said, See you next year. Laminated signs staked in my soil announcing Future Whispering Pines Pavilion. And finally, a polite bureaucratic letter from the county about a feasibility study to evaluate public benefit zones surrounding Diamondback Lake government speak that can be the first step toward eminent domain. Bureaucracy can roll like a slow bulldozer. I hung motion sensor cameras, infrared trail cams, and started sleeping with one eye open. That's when Grayson Miller walked into the story, an older man who'd been at the HOA's formation. Quiet, polite, the kind of neighbor who asks about irrigation lines and remembers your father's name. He slid a manila envelope across a diner table, and inside were meeting minutes. Budget logs, invoices showing reserve funds diverted to PR and legal fees, and a payment stub to a land integration consultant whose principal shareholder was Karen's cousin. Grayson said he couldn't be part of it any longer. He'd known my father, and he couldn't watch them loot a community chest to underwrite a private crusade. For the first time in weeks, I felt the knot in my chest loosen. Someone was on the inside and willing to speak. We changed tactics. If they wanted a narrative, we'd give them receipts. Legal warning signs went up at every entry, citing trespass statutes. A glass display case was mounted by the dock with my 1931 dam permit, notarized and framed like a museum artifact. A plaque explained in plain cold language that the lake was private property, and next to it, I framed the server logs linking the fake site to Karen's email documents, not slogans placed where people couldn't miss them. Folks who came to the shore read instead of scrolling past, and the glossy flyer lost its shine when it had to stand beside evidence. Grayson introduced me to Phil Huxley, a retired reporter who runs a watchdog blog. Phil came with a drone, 2 cameras, and the kind of stubbornness that asks the right questions. He walked the shoreline, photographed the displays, compared the doctored maps to county archives, and wrote a piece called The Lake That Wasn't Theirs. The article rippled out. Local, then state, then national blogs picked it up. Board members resigned, residents demanded audits, and the county paused its feasibility study. The tide had turned because facts once printed and spread are hard to smother with PR. Court is where receipts matter most, and Hank moved fast. Counterclaims for fraud, falsification of public records, and misuse of HOA funds. Forensic examiners compared the HOA's overlay to the county original and found different pixel density, mismatched fonts, and a signature belonging to a county clerk who'd been dead for years. The PDF edit history traced back to Karen, and the district attorney opened an investigation. The stakes shifted from civil posturing to criminal jeopardy, which is when people start to sweat who once smiled easy. The preliminary hearing felt like watching a dam break in slow motion, binders of evidence laid across the table, trail cam stills that looked like a surveillance reel, the dam permit mounted like a relic, and Karen arrived alone, folders in hand, her composure flickering into a look I hadn't expected: fear. Hank walked through the timeline, methodically exposed the budget diversions, the fake website, the forged map, and the judge began to look less amused by clever rhetoric and more concerned with facts. The HOA complaint was dismissed with prejudice. Our counterclaim stood, and the DA referred document fraud and misuse of funds for criminal consideration. She took a plea, paid fines, and was barred from serving on any HOA board in the state. Her house was foreclosed and later sold at auction to a retired wildlife biologist who reads maps for a living. Poetic justice, perhaps, but justice that tastes like paperwork and slow days in court. The HOA survived, but as a skeleton crew chastened and forced into transparency, Grayson agreed to chair a reform committee on the condition of full audits and rewritten bylaws, and the community began the tedious work of cleaning up the mess Karen had made. A year later, the lake is quieter, the trees look taller, or maybe I just see them differently and my mornings haven't changed. I still wake at 5, check the trail cams, fix busted fence posts, answer guest emails, and repair the boat launch when ice rips through it in spring. But something inside me shifted. I used to think stewardship meant keeping the land standing for the next storm. Now I know stewardship means defending the truth about that land, sometimes loudly, sometimes quietly, with documents and friends and a willingness to show receipts. We had a small cookout on the anniversary, Hank, Grayson, Lacey, and her husband Phil, with his recorder switched off. No music, just stories and whiskey under the cedar grove. And when Hank tapped the framed court ruling and grinned, I felt something like peace, not triumphant, but settled, the kind of quiet that comes after a long storm. So tell me, when does community become entitlement and who gets to decide? Should every patch of land be opened in the name of inclusion? Or are there places owed the dignity of being left alone and stewarded by those who maintain them? Tell me where you stand. Share a time. You defended something you loved. And if this story hit a nerve, share it, argue, disagree, and let's have the conversation, because these fights are how communities figure out what community actually means.
Cảm ơn các bạn đã xem video.